To start, I was raised probably the same way that all of you were, to in effect equate heroin with bad, with evil, and with prison. And you kind of don't think about it that much, but we all know that being addicted to any of these substances is certainly not a good thing, and nothing that I will say will imply in any fashion that it's not a serious thing. I can also say that after college I was in the Peace Corps, and so I bring that up to show you that I care about people. After the Peace Corps, I went into law school and was immediately being drafted. It was the height of the Vietnam War, about 1968. And so I joined, enlisted with the Navy, and after law school I became a Navy lawyer, a staff judge advocate in the US Naval Air Station in Guam, and thereafter a criminal defense attorney at US Naval Air Station in Lemoore, California. And in Guam, I saw, of course, that I was filling out charge sheets against my shipmates for numbers of offenses, certainly including drug offenses. And then as additional duty, I was a criminal defense attorney defending people, other shipmates from other commands that were charged with other things, including drug offenses. Didn't think about it very much, just thought that was the normal thing to do. I was, in effect, a drug warrior. Looking back, though, at the beginning in Guam in about 1972, they had made big headlines in the paper saying that they had their first homicide since the end of the Second World War, and they were all concerned about that and wondered how it happened. And as time went along, it turned out that lots of people were starting to bring illegal drugs during the Vietnam War in military aircraft from Vietnam, from Thailand, and this homicide turned out to be yet another drug deal that went wrong. And by the time I left the island a couple of years later, unfortunately, it was a fairly common experience to have homicides that were drug-related. After that, and I was discharged from the Navy, I became a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, and for at least a short time held the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California. 75 kilos of heroin, 165 pounds was and is a whole bunch of heroin. But does anyone have a concept of what the record prosecution is today in the Central District of California? 17 tons of cocaine in one place. Just boggles your mind as to the amount of drugs that we're talking about. And if you really think about it seriously, there's no society in the history of mankind that has not had some form of mind-altering, sometimes addicting substance to use, to misuse, to abuse, and even get addicted to, except maybe the Eskimos, because they couldn't grow anything, but now chemistry and transportation has changed that as well. So let's come to the blunt reality here that these drugs, harmful as they can be, are here to stay. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's the reality. So if that's the case, they're going to bring harm to our society. So we should, as a government, as a people, come up with forms of approaches to that that reduce those harms. And that's where we should go. And prison is not in that list. So you come to other realizations that, for example, you can arrest, convict, incarcerate a big-time drug user, a big-time drug seller, and that does not reduce the amount of drugs, illegal drugs, in your society. Yes, maybe for 6, 12, 14 hours, but then other people see it as an employment opportunity and end up replacing that person, and drugs are fully available. You look at the system otherwise, if you arrest and convict a serial rapist, rape goes down in your community. You arrest and convict a burglar, car theft, those offenses go down as well, but it's not true with drugs. I was one time giving a talk in front of a pretty conservative group, and there happened to be 3 prison wardens in the audience. And I made the comment, look, folks, we can't even keep these drugs, bad as they can be, out of our prisons, for heaven's sake. How do you expect to keep them off the streets of any of our towns and cities? That you can get as many drugs as you want in your prisons, depending basically on price. And one of the wardens smiled and said, well, you can't get all you want, but okay. So let's come to that realization. You then look at Governor Gary Johnson's comment, a friend of mine, who said, okay, it's clear that we have drug problems in our society, but about 10 of them are related to the drug itself. Again, not minimizing them, but 90% are drug prohibition problems, drug money problems. Graphic example, look at what's going on in Mexico. All of this violence, crime, beheadings has nothing to do with drugs whatsoever, nothing. It's all drug money that causes those things. And it's our drug money that does it. So let's come to that reality. Look, we cannot repeal the law of supply and demand. And figuratively, if you have somebody holding a $50 bill out on a street corner saying, give me $50 worth of marijuana, somebody is going to meet that demand. So we're either going to have marijuana, for example, in our society, regardless. Marijuana is the largest cash crop in the state of California today. That implies to me that somebody's using it. So let's recognize that. Oh, by the way, grapes is number 2. So if we have that as a major product, let's take away a whole lot of money from juvenile street gangs, from Mexican drug cartels and other thugs, and use it, control it, and use that money to pay our firefighters, pay our teachers, and fix our roads. How difficult can this be? So you get closer to the situation, and you will understand the truth that the term controlled substances is the biggest oxymoron in our world today. That means basically a term that's internally inconsistent. Controlled substances, no, because as soon as you prohibit a substance, you give up all of your controls to the bad guys. You know, anything dealing with quality control, a huge issue. Demand, advertising, price, age restrictions, you all give those up to the Mexican drug cartels and the juvenile street gangs. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. So these are things that we need to look at. We need to allow ourselves to discuss this because we have a prohibition on discussion. Just because we discuss drug policy, just because we discuss that we have options or even engage in those options does not mean we condone drug abuse. If we just get that point across to our fellow citizens, I guarantee you we will change away from drug policy, from drug prohibition. So I felt so strongly about this. I became a judge in the end of 1983 and would see in my own courtroom we're churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose whatsoever. By the way, many of them are mentally ill that are self-medicating in order to stave off the demons or whatever, and we're doing untold harm to these mentally fragile people by putting them in jail. The United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our people, both by sheer numbers as well as per capita. You'll hear the statistic, and it should really bother you as it bothers me. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. We're either the most criminally oriented people in the world or we're doing something wrong. Which do you think it is? So I did something very unusual for a sitting trial court judge in Orange County, California, back in April of 1992, and I held a press conference, very unusual thing to do, and told anyone that would listen, hey, we're not doing it right. We could do it better. Drug prohibition isn't working. And since that time, I've been speaking publicly as often as I can to people that would hear me, and now when I talk to Rotary clubs, religious organizations, chambers of commerce, whatever, I tell them the stark truth, which is drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of the United States of America, second only to slavery. And if you'll listen, regardless of what your interests are, I will tell you that regardless of what that is, it can be with education or health care or criminal or terrorism, environment, I will show you to your satisfaction how it is made worse because of our nation's policy of drug prohibition. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. So these are things that we're facing. Most people realize that drug prohibition is not working, and that word is getting out. So why do we perpetuate this failed system? And the answer, there are basically two answers. And the first answer, it comes in two words. And the answer is our children. We want to protect our children. So we will continue with this failed policy for all of its defects, unquote, because we want to keep our children away from a lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling. But I'm here to tell you, and I was in juvenile court, you see this time and again, that we are putting our children in harm's way for two extremely important reasons. And the first is, don't take my word for it. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find, what is easier for you to get if you want to, marijuana or alcohol? And every last one of them, if they care, would know where to go. It would be easier for them to get marijuana or any other illicit substance than it would be alcohol. Why? Because drug dealers don't ask for ID. You know, the least concern of an illegal drug dealer is age restrictions. They don't care. Somebody might say, oh, no one wants to get my 12-year-old daughter hooked on cocaine, and the answer is, sure they do, because they'll make money on them. A disgusting situation. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. And number two, putting our children in harm's way is, look, most people understand, oh, I want to be in the NBA, I want to be professional football in the NFL. Most of our kids understand that there really aren't very many Michael Jordans, Kobe Bryants, or Stephen Currys, so the odds of that are not good. So we otherwise might as well take out billboards in the inner cities or anywhere else saying, if you want to make some money, the most money you can ever make is selling drugs. Juvenile street gangs are using this as a recruiting tool. Hey, you want to make some money? Join our gang and be part of the action. Not a good thing. So let's take the money away from those folks. And on the macro level, let's look at Mexico like we said, with all of the beheadings. Hey, let's look at something else. Drug prohibition is the golden goose of terrorism. If our country really cared, our government really cared about fighting terrorism, understand that the largest source of funds for terrorist organizations around the world is drugs, illegal drugs. And if our government cared, it puts tears in my eyes to say this, but I believe it, they would do the thing that would give the most results in fighting terrorism, which is take away their money, take away their funding. And our government doesn't even discuss that issue, which is really a stupid result. We must change away from this failed system. But it's not all doom and gloom. I'm here to tell you that there are real options that we do have. How many of you are aware, for example, of what has happened in Portugal since 2001? Not very many, and I fault the media for this. There should be headlines in every newspaper saying, hey, we have hope, there's a better way. Portugal, in the year 2000, recognized that they had the largest drug problem of any country in the European Union. So they did something really intelligent. They actually put up a neutral commission, non-political commission, and tasked them to go out into the country, figure out what our problems are, and give us recommendations for what to do about it. And the commission took about 9-12 months and came back and said, we have two problems in our country. Number one is, if you are a problem drug user, you're afraid of your own government. You're not going to bring your problem to the government because they'll punish you. So they take it underground. And number two is, we're spending so much money on the investigation, prosecution, and incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders, we don't have any money left for drug treatment. So they did something really intelligent in Portugal in the year 2001. They decriminalized all drugs. Now, let me define some terms for a minute, because I don't want to legalize marijuana. I don't even know anybody that wants to legalize any of these drugs. If you're going to think about legalization of drugs, think aspirin. You know, your 12-year-old daughter could go to any local pharmacy, could buy generic, could buy name brands, could buy a case of this stuff. It's advertised by the free market, no age restrictions. No one I know wants to do that. What we want to do is have strict regulations and controls, in effect, like alcohol. Far different situation. Decriminalization means, almost literally, it is still illegal in Portugal or in Holland, by the way, to buy, use, sell, possess any of these drugs, but as long as you keep within very well-known general guidelines, the police are instructed, frequently in writing, to look the other way and to leave these people alone. Now look, I'm a judge. I believe in having reasonable laws, and I believe in enforcing those laws, and to instruct your police not to follow the law conceptually causes me some problems. Nevertheless, what happened in Portugal, they decriminalized all drugs in 2001. And thereafter, they had the Cato Institute, about 10 years after that, took the information, digested it, and reported to the country and the world. Not in our newspapers much, but to the world. And they said, you know, drug use in Portugal pretty much remains the same, which gives the lie to pretty much every drug czar we've ever had in our country who says, oh, if we were to have a different option, we'd become a nation of drug zombies or something like that. Not only is that silly, I think it's insulting. That I wouldn't, you could give away cocaine on the street corner. I'm not going to jam cocaine up my nose, and I don't think most other people aren't either. But that happened in Portugal. Drug usage pretty much remained the same, but problem drug usage went down by 50%, by half. Why? Because now, if a police officer or someone encounters somebody that's under the influence of these various drugs or is injecting or whatever, yes, they're given a citation, but not to come to judges like me, but to go to medical professionals that can help them. They'll come in, hey, Charlie, what are you using? What's your lifestyle? What can we do to help you? Help you get a job, help you have medical issues, etc. Problem drug usage has gone down by 50%. Same thing basically in Holland, who decriminalized all of these drugs basically back in the 1970s. The Minister of Health held a press conference in Holland numbers of years ago and said, we only have half the marijuana consumption in our country per capita as you do in the United States. Listen to this, both for adults and for teenagers. Why, he went on to say, we have succeeded in making pot boring. That's a good thing. We glamorize it by making it illegal, by having an obscene profit motive to get you and other people hooked on it. Look, people could sell alcohol on their high school campuses. They could sell Jim Beam for all that matters. They don't. They could. Why not? Because there's no money in it. Let's make the same thing with regard to these other drugs as well. We have hope. There are ways. Switzerland. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's happened in Switzerland since the late 1990s. They put in clinics in various heroin-using cities and towns in Switzerland. Clinics made up of social workers, medical doctors, registered nurses. They would bring these people into the clinic, and then what would they do? Pretty much the same thing you or I would do. They'd try to help them get drug treatment, get off their heroin. But if they didn't want to, they'd say, look, as long as you satisfy 3 criteria, we have a program for you. The criteria are you're at least 22 years of age and have failed traditional drug treatment at least twice, that you are addicted to heroin, not that hard to prove, and number 3, that you'll remain crime-free in the future. If you do that, you're on the program. What did that mean? They are given a prescription for heroin, they can have it filled at pharmaceutical prices, and then they can inject their heroin under medically controlled circumstances at the clinic. Now, stop for a minute. None of these drugs we're talking about is expensive. The only reason they're expensive is because they're illegal. You know, marijuana is not called a weed for nothing. It'll grow anywhere. And heroin's the opium poppy, by the way. For years, the National Park Service was growing it in Monticello until the DEA found out about it. It's a beautiful flower. DEA made them take it out. But I assure you, if it'll grow in Virginia, it will grow anywhere. So the only reason these things are expensive is because they're illegal. So if you're going to get a prescription for a maximum amount of about $10 a day under pharmaceutical controlled prices, you can afford that drug. Number 2, this is not an orgy, so-called, of heroin usage, because remember, there's a medical doctor on this team. And the medical doctor will give you a blood test and figure out the strength of your addiction, and then will prescribe you enough heroin to maintain you at that level. Not enough to give you that euphoria or whatever it is, not enough to, or too much to go through a withdrawal, but will maintain you at your current level. Hence, by the way, the program is called a heroin maintenance program. Back to the story. Soon they found out that, of course, no one there had overdosed, because overdosing is a quality control problem. It's unknown strength, it's unknown purity. On the streets, you can use the same amount of heroin today that you used yesterday. Unbeknownst to you, it's 3 times stronger. You use it and you die. That's a drug prohibition problem. Nobody's overdosed in Switzerland. Nobody's gotten AIDS. Nobody has gotten any of these other blood-borne diseases. Employment has gone up by 50%. They're basically able to get off the dole, treat their families like they want to. These things work. And by the way, this is also very consistent with my libertarian philosophy, that you all know who Robert Downey Jr. is, a very successful actor, but has pretty much had a very long heroin problem. And I'm proud of him, he's making good movies, but he should be careful. He will always have that craving. But it makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol problem. And as you all know, Betty Ford was the wife of President Gerald Ford and a self-acknowledged alcoholic. So it's a medical issue. You want to bring them closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. But if Robert Downey Jr., Betty Ford, you or I drive a motor vehicle impaired by, you name it, methamphetamines, alcohol, which is my drug of choice, marijuana, heroin, whatever, that's a crime. What's the difference? Hear ye, hear ye. I love that statement. Hear ye, hear ye. The criminal justice system is designed for and quite good at holding people accountable for their actions, protecting us from each other. So if you drive a motor vehicle impaired by any of these, you're putting our safety at risk, legitimate criminal justice issue. But If all you're doing is harming yourself, the criminal justice system is not designed to protect us from ourselves. And that makes perfect sense philosophically, because as far as I'm concerned, the government has as much right to control me as an adult as to what I put into my body as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. So these are things, you look at it, any of us who are over 21 could go home tonight and drink 10 martinis if we wanted to. Certainly not a smart thing to do, certainly not a medically healthy thing to do, but it's not a violation of law. And you look further into this entire area, the most successful program that we have had with regard to any form of mind-altering, sometimes addicting substances is what we've done in the last 10 or 20 years with regard to cigarettes. You know, we can look at that and see that we have reduced consumption of cigarettes, not by making it illegal, that'd just bring Al Capone and Mexican drug cartels into the cigarette distribution business, but by putting out honest information in the marketplace for people, honest medical information, social mores, regulations. You can't smoke cigarettes in this building. Hooray for that. And that's where we need to go. And I look back into my experience, and I can tell you a couple of things. There was one time in which I was sentencing 2 young men at various times for being under the influence of methamphetamines. And in California, and pretty much all jurisdictions, before you're going to plead guilty, you have to give us a factual basis, which means basically you put into your own words why you're guilty of the offense. And I heard from them, Your Honor, pretty much the same story. My drug of choice was marijuana, and for years I would buy my marijuana from the same supplier. But one fine day, unbeknownst to me, he sold me some marijuana laced with methamphetamines. I ended up getting myself addicted. And I keep thinking to myself, wait a minute, you know, we all know smoking cigarettes is harmful to your health, but at least if you go to your local mini-mart and buy a pack of Marlboros, you're going to know it's not laced with methamphetamines. Those are drug prohibition problems. So let's all get together. I make you a guarantee. As soon as we come to our senses and repeal drug prohibition, all of us, within a year, maybe 2, will join hands, look back, be aghast, and we could have perpetuated such a failed system for so long. That is a guarantee. It's for the sake of our children, it's for the sake of our country, it's really for the sake of the world. So that is my view from my judge's perspective. Use your own insights, and I'm sure you will come to the same conclusion. Thank you.